Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Spaulding, Associate Vice President and Dean of Educational Programs for Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Alan P. Kirby Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. Hillsdale College is an independent institution of higher learning founded in 1844 by those believing that the diffusion of learning is essential to the perpetuity of the blessings of civil and religious liberty. And so for 170 years, we have been, without any government support, providing education and liberal arts for students regardless of race, creed, or color. We continue to do so. That commitment, which we hold very dear, is represented today, especially in the person of the 12th president of Hillsdale College, well recognized and with us here today from Michigan, Dr. Larry Arnn. The purpose of the Kirby Center here in Washington, D.C. is to extend the college's mission to the nation's capital by teaching students, citizens, and political leaders about the principles and practices of American constitutionalism and how to understand and apply those principles in today's politics. In doing so, we seek to promote not policies or partisanship, but a statesmanship worthy of American liberty. And I'd like, in that sense of building statesmanship, recognize some friends of ours from California who are here, several state legislatures from California. Welcome to the Kirby Center, especially Senator Mike Morell and his wife Joni, who have sent 2 of their sons to Hillsdale College. Thank you. As is our custom with these lectures, a Hillsdale student will actually introduce today's speaker. Michael Avang is a junior majoring in politics and minoring in business at Hillsdale College, taking classes this semester here at the Kirby Center, one of mine included. He's an excellent student. He's interning for Representative Tim Holzkamp of Kansas as part of the Hillsdale WHIP program. Prior to coming to Hillsdale College, he was a battalion data chief, a martial arts instructor, a machine gun instructor, a machine gunner and radio operator with the rank of sergeant, all in the United States Marine Corps. We thank him for that service. Michael.
Thank you, Dr. Spaulding. It's a privilege to introduce today's speaker. Michael Barone is a leading American conservative political analyst, pundit, journalist. He earned a bachelor's degree from Harvard University in 1966 and a law degree from Yale. He is the principal co-author of the Almanac of American Politics and a regular commentator on U.S. elections and political trends for the Fox News Channel. Over the years, he has written for many major publications, including The Economist, The New York Times, the Detroit Press, American Enterprise, and the Daily Telegraph of London. In April of 2009, he joined the Washington Examiner, leaving his position of 18 years at U.S. News and World Report. Today, he is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Mr. Barone has traveled to all 50 states and all 435 congressional districts. He has also traveled to 37 foreign countries, reporting recently on elections in Russia, Mexico, Italy, and Britain. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Michael Barone.
Well, thank you very much. I've never been introduced by a machine gunner before. And thank you indeed for your service. And I understand that you are not an ex-Marine because there is no such thing as an ex-Marine. It's nice to be with you in this room. It's not a huge room, but then it's not very much smaller than that one that we see in the picture over there. And as Dr. Arnn said to me, we're still looking to try to accumulate the talent that was there in that room in 1787. I'm sure we've got some nascent ingredients of that, but we're still working on it. We're still working on that in the Capitol building, not far away, which is perhaps appropriately under construction or renovation at the present time. As you said in introducing me, I've gone through a kind of varied professional career. I've moved from one profession to another, each one of which tends to pay less than the one before, and to have a lower level of intellectual honesty and integrity. So I started off near the top with the law. Then I went down a couple of steps to political consulting. And then I descended, a whole staircase down to journalism. And there's only one thing left: academia. Except, of course, for Hillsdale College, where you've got faculty members like my friend Paul Ray, who I think is one of the leading scholars in America of our time. We've just had an election, as many of you know. We had former Speaker Nancy Pelosi comment on it. She said it wasn't a wave, it was just an ebb tide or something. I guess my response to that is to pose the question, did Custer lose at Little Bighorn? I think, yeah, it was a wave. It's interesting. The popular vote for the House of Representatives, which has become a pretty good index of partisan and, to a large extent, ideological opinion in the country, showed Republicans apparently leading by 52 to 45%. We're still waiting for the count in some places, including California. California has taken as long as 5 weeks to count its votes. In Brazil, where they had a recent election, they count them in 5 hours. I'm waiting for California to catch up with the technological sophistication and advanced modern efficiency of Brazil. But that appears to be the margin. It's the same margin as in 2010 and 1994. There will be more Republicans elected to the House of Representatives this year than in any year since 1928. Do we have any people here who were here in the 1928 cycle, at least sentient and aware of it? There will be more Republicans in state legislatures than at any time since the 1920s as well. The Republican Party has won a majority in the Senate with a net gain of 8 seats, confirmed in Alaska yesterday, and almost certainly 9 after the Louisiana runoff, December 6th. It'll be the largest net gain for any party in Senate seats since 1980, when the Republicans gained 12 in the same year that Ronald Reagan was elected president over Jimmy Carter. Now, this is not a final victory for the Republican Party or for conservative principles. The folks over there did not design a system that produces final victories for anybody. They designed a system of representative government, of checks and balances, in which there is always room for change in various directions and for a creative statesmanship to lead us in a better direction. But it is a significant victory. And one reason is that we're in a period of straight party voting. When I started off writing my book that I'm co-author of, The Almanac of American Politics, some 42 years ago, I like to say that it's highly unusual for the first edition of a book of this nature to have been written by someone at the age of 4. When I started writing this, we were kind of a split-ticket country. You had Republican landslides for president in 1972, 1984, and half the congressional districts that voted for the Republican presidents elected Democratic congressmen. That doesn't happen anymore, and it's an interesting case that St. Teresa of Avila said that the most tragic prayers are answered prayers. The political scientists, when I was in school, were calling for, they said, wouldn't it be better in the United States if we had one clearly conservative party and one clearly liberal party? And Gallup used to ask questions on that on his polls. About half of Americans in the late 40s, early 50s said, gee, that would be a good idea. Of course, I think most of the political scientists expected that the clearly liberal party would win most of the elections, and that's one of the reasons they wanted that. Well, their prayers have been answered. We pretty much have that. We've got pretty ideologically coherent parties, and we've got a population which, while a lot of people say they're independent and they vote for the man, not the party, when you actually look how they vote, they're voting all for the Republicans or voting for all the Democrats. That is the pattern that we see in this in the Congress that was elected in 2012. Showing my age by starting off a year with 19. Anybody ever do that? You find yourself doing that? In the Congress elected in 2012, we had a record number of low number of split congressional districts. That is, congressional districts vote for president of one party, congressman of another. It was 26 out of the 435 districts voted that way. There were 9 districts that voted for Mitt Romney, an elected Democratic congressman. 6 of them elected Republican congressmen on last Tuesday. But so we are a straight ticket, and so the party score is a pretty good indication of where we are. And so we went into this election. The president won re-election in 2012 with 51% of the votes at a time when his job performance rating was 50%. In pre-election polls, his job performance rating was 42%, and the exit poll was 44%. Basically, most of the results are reasonably well predicted from that statement. The Republicans won or will soon win all 7 seats held by Democrats in states that were carried by Mitt Romney: Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, December 6th, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, West Virginia. They won 2 seats in states that were carried by President Obama: Colorado and Iowa. And they came very close in 2 others, in New Hampshire and unexpectedly in Virginia. And the Republicans held threatened seats in Kansas, Kentucky, and Georgia, where the polls, it was interesting, polls underpredicted the Republican candidates' performance in these seriously contested races. The polls actually were quite accurate in predicting the Democrats' performance. I mean, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the Democrat running for re-election, who got 65% in 2008, the polls showed him at 48%. He got 49%. He won 49-48. The polls undercounted Ed Gillespie's thing. I've got a column coming out in the Washington Examiner examining this phenomenon and trying to understand some of the some of the reasons why the polls. But basically, in a wave year, Democrats get what they're polling, and Republicans tend to do better in a Republican wave year. We get a Democratic wave year like we had in 2006 or 8, it would be the other way around. Governorships. One of the things those folks thought about and contrived to create was a republic in which states would be sovereign and would have their own political decisions to make through Republican forms of government, which they're guaranteed by the Constitution. And it was generally predicted that Republicans were going to lose governorships. They did lose Pennsylvania, where the Republican governor had been involved in the Penn State situation. That was not a big help. But the Republicans retained the states of Wisconsin and Michigan against heavy opposition in Wisconsin from the public employee unions, and Michigan from the private sector unions. The bargaining changes that Scott Walker put through in Wisconsin were essentially ratified by the voters, and in fact his Democratic opponent even said she wouldn't change them herself. The right to work law that was put in and signed by Governor Rick Snyder in Michigan was retained. Republicans retained by solid margins governorships of beleaguered conservatives in Kansas and Georgia. They retained Florida. Although Rick Scott, the Republican governor, won by only 1% for the second consecutive time, Mr. Scott is highly successful in business and contributed $70 million to his first campaign, which enabled him to win with 1%. And it reminds me of the comment that John F. Kennedy made after he was elected president by a narrow margin. And somebody said, well, your father financed the campaign, how come you did better? And he said, well, my father said, I'll be damned if I'll pay for a landslide. Rick Scott apparently operates on the same philosophy. Republicans also gained governorships in Illinois, Massachusetts, and Maryland. They came very close in Connecticut. They lost in Rhode Island, but the Democratic candidate was actually a tougher opponent of public employee unions than the Republican candidate there. So Republicans basically have state government. More than half of Americans have got Republican governors, Republican state senates, Republican state houses or assemblies or houses of delegates. And Democrats do have 7 states that only have 1/6 of the nation's population, of which almost all of that is in California. We used to want to saw off, Barry Goldwater wanted to saw off the northeast coast and send it out to sea. We're hoping that when seismic events produce the big one, we'll wave goodbye to coastal California, and we'll see. I think these victories represent about as unequivocally as political campaign results can represent in the messy everyday world a rejection of the big government policies of the Obama Democrats. The Obama Democrats came to office with supermajorities, 2008 elections, 2009 inaugural, operating under an assumption that particularly in times of economic distress, Americans would be supportive of or amenable to big government policies. If you just give them what Mitt Romney infelicitously called free stuff, people were going to be happy and delighted and pleased and grateful. And they learned that lesson in many ways from the beautifully written histories of the New Deal, Arthur Schlesinger and other writers. These were, in their time, were best-selling books. They cemented this vision of the 1930s. I tried to advance an alternative vision of the 1930s in my book, Our Country, The Shaping of America from Roosevelt to Reagan. It has not had quite best-selling capacity. On Amazon the other day, I noticed that a copy was available for 11 cents. I recommend that every Hillsdale student should have one. I'm not sure that's going to get me, at a meal on Washington's poshest restaurant, but students can afford the book now. If you're Amazon Prime, it's going to cost you less than 4 minutes on a DC parking meter. But I submitted a different version, and what I said basically, and I fortified with this election results, and I can give you detailed comparisons of the 1934 and 36 election results if anyone is interested. Basically, people may say initially they like big government. When they see how it works out, they don't like it. They recoil against that. We see this again and again in 1938, 1946, 1980, 1994, and again in 2014. When they actually see how it works, when something penetrates what the Obamacare advisor Jonathan Gruber called the stupidity of the American people, people don't like it too much. I think this came as a surprise to the Obama Democrats. They thought the stimulus package was going to be popular. Hey, we're spending lots of money, people will like it. They thought Obamacare would be popular. They still are occasionally writing columns saying that, well, it's just on the brink of popularity now. And people like some parts of it, and that sort of thing. Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that we would learn what was in the act once it was passed, and that we would like it. So far, those predictions haven't come true. We are now sitting at 4 years and 8 months after Obamacare was passed. That's an interesting half-life. It has not come true. They passed higher taxes on higher earners after the 2012 election. That'll hit the 1%. People will love that. Well, you didn't hear much about the stimulus package, about Obamacare, about higher taxes on high earners from Democrats in the campaign. You did hear a lot, especially about Obamacare, from Republicans in this campaign. The Democrats talked about peripheral issues. These people that want to redistribute huge amounts of income and penalize the top 1%, impose 75, 80% taxes on them. are all entranced with raising the minimum wage. When you look at what the minimum wage actually does when you raise it, it basically has fast food customers subsidizing fast food workers minus those workers who get laid off and replaced by kiosks. That really socks it to the 1%. It's a pathetic public policy in terms of the stated goals of these people. You heard the Democrats talk a lot about the war on women. Out in Colorado, NARAL Pro-Choice America, which has taken abortion out of its name, ran ads saying that female contraceptives would not be available in Colorado and there would be a shortage of condoms if Cory Gardner, the Republican, was elected to the U.S. Senate. Well, we've got a test case of that. Cory Gardner was elected to the U.S. Senate. Speculators who want to perhaps respond to these predicted shortages could put their money on the table and see if they're going to make some money doing so. It was pathetic. And they, the Democratic Senator Mark Udall, who had an interesting record on a number of issues, spent more than half his ad money on the war on women. The Denver Post, a liberal editorial page, called it a, quote, obnoxious one-issue campaign, unquote. That's what happens to a party when its major positions are not popular, when it can't talk about the major and central issues because they don't work for them, they work against them, and that sort of thing. You heard, at the same time as Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid was denouncing the Koch brothers, other major contributors to conservative causes, he was ladling out the $100 million pledged by this San Francisco billionaire Tom Steyer, who wants to oppose fracking and so forth. The Democrats took the money. They didn't run anti-fracking ads. Turns out that people actually want more energy production and lower prices for gasoline, natural gas, and oil. They want the jobs that can be created, good-paying jobs created by these things. So I think this is a case where the core of the Democratic Party, the black voters and gentry liberals, my friend Joel Cochrana's term. If you don't know what a gentry liberal is, we can arrange a bus to take you over to Georgetown and you can talk to some of the residents there. The Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a gentry liberal, beautiful house, San Francisco, the wine country, so forth. Those are the two groups. When Barack Obama designed his own state Senate district in 2002 after the 2000 census, that were the groups he combined. Blacks, majority from the Democratic South Side of Chicago, and then north of the Loop, the near north side, rich liberal contributors. Their policies aren't working for them. They gave, they spending free stuff, Obamacare and so forth. Voters don't appreciate it, don't see it as benefiting them, see it as hurting their situation, see big government as performing poorly. The other issues that they've gone on, this so-called war on women, what I call abortion absolutism, that's frayed and really isn't a winner anymore. Gun control, that is repelling people. And I think we can see what's happening if we look at two critical groups of the electorate. I've got a Washington Examiner column today, which is also the lead column in RealClearPolitics.com, that talks about some of these things. We were told after the 2008 election that Democrats were going to be a majority party in America because Hispanics and non-whites, Hispanics, and Millennials were 2-to-1 for Barack Obama in 2008, which is true. And they were going to vote that way forever, and presto, we were going to have a Democratic majority in the country because these are inevitably increasing percentages of the total electorate. The last point is accurate. The first point is dubious. With Hispanics, one of the Senate race with the largest Hispanic population was in Colorado, and one of the things we saw there is that abortion absolutism did not work for them. I don't think they're really necessarily strong abortion opponents. This is not like a Irish Catholic parish in the 1950s, as some conservatives portray them, but it's not really very relevant to their situation. Gun control. The Democrats in Colorado passed a gun control bill. 2 state senators who voted for it were recalled by the voters and replaced by Republicans, including a Hispanic state senator from 42% Hispanic Pueblo County. That district went Republican again in the election. The Democrats used to carry Pueblo County by 20%. They carried it by 1% this time. The liberals, environmentalists in Colorado wanted to put a ballot proposition on stopping fracking. They were persuaded by other Democrats who were reading the polls and decided that that wasn't one of God's great ideas and pressured them to get it off. And basically, when you look at what Hispanic voters want, they want jobs and education. They want a chance to move upward in society. They're not getting that from the Obama economy. They're not getting good education from the teacher union-controlled public schools. They want something different. And if you look overall at the country, Hispanic vote was 71% for Obama over Mitt Romney. This time it was 62% Democratic. That is buoyed upwards, however, by heavy Democratic percentages, over 70% in California, New Jersey, and New York, which have about 40% of eligible Hispanic voters. If you look at Hispanic voters in Texas, in Florida, in Colorado, in Kansas, in Georgia, in Florida, what you see is the Hispanic Democratic percentages are much lower. Those voters are in play. They care more about jobs and education than they care about immigration, though they care somewhat about that. We can discuss that more perhaps. But my point is this. Hispanics in America and the other subgroup we look at sometimes, Asians, my friend Ron Brownstein likes to lump them together with blacks as non-whites. I think this is ahistorical. Black Americans have had a particular historic heritage going back to slavery and segregation. That is unique in our country. It's one that Hillsdale College responded positively to back in the 1850s, if I'm not mistaken, and was a leader in moving towards civil rights and equal rights in America. Hispanics and Asians, in their variety of different subgroups there, haven't had that historic experience. Asian immigrants that move here in America are not directed to use separate restrooms and drinking fountains. They are not prevented from voting by armed violence and so forth. To assume that they're going to respond as black voters respond assumes a similar historic experience, and I think it's just simply a contrary to fact proposition. Millennials, under 30s, 2008, 66-32 Obama. That was, if you take the popular vote margin for Obama in 2008 among millennials, it amounted to 7% of the total electorate, the Democratic over Republican margin. That was Obama's total margin. He carried voters over 30 probably by 50-49. The Republicans missed a chance to win that election when they didn't pass a constitutional amendment raising the voting age to 35. Well, where were millennials this time? According to the exit poll, they were Democratic 54-43 in House elections. That's a Democratic margin. If you measure it as the Democratic over Republican margin as a percentage of the total electorate, it's not 7%, it's 1.5%. If you adjust for the fact that you're going to have a higher millennial turnout in a presidential year than you had in the off year, which is surely true, it's 2%. That is a challenge for Republicans. It's not necessarily permanent death of the Republican Party. And I think here that we're seeing in operation a basic tension between the attitudes of this generation towards their life projects and the public policies of the Obama administration. The Obama Democrats believe in centralized command and control. They believe in the stupidity of the American people. They believe that enlightened experts, who usually translate as people we knew in school, can devise systems and so forth that can help the ordinary person navigate through the vicissitudes of life and what they always insist is a complex society. Turns out it's a little too complex for them to understand. As Friedrich Hayek told us, no central planner can figure out everything about a complex society, and workings of free markets, free rights of free expression, the rule of law enables results to be much more optimal than centralized command and control. But that's what they give them, centralized. It was arguably working in the grain, with the grain of the changes in society in the industrial era. If you go about 2 hours east of Hillsdale College, you'll see the Ford Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan. Henry Ford built that plant just a little less than 100 years ago. It cost about $1 billion in 1916. That was actually a lot of money then. They had a workforce of 40,000 people. This summer I was in Michigan, where I grew up. I drove around the Ford Rouge plant, the perimeter. It's 5.0 miles on the odometer to drive around that plant. In a big industrial area of 40,000 people, the idea of centralized command and control seemed to make sense. We're in a different age now. We're in an information age. And the artifact of the information age is not the Ford Rouge plant, 5 miles around, 40,000 people working there. It's this. That's got more information available than was available to all the centralized command control people in the management of the Ford Motor Company, the United Auto Workers, Local 600, et cetera, that were operating in the Ford Rouge plant. And I think this generation is a generation of people that want to personalize the world. They want to have their own Facebook pages, their iPod playlists. They want to establish their own friendships and their own networks. And they are seeking, I think, work and life paths that will enable them to achieve satisfaction through, as my AEI president Arthur Brooks says, through earning success economically, but also earning success in terms of family, earning success by contributing to your community, earning success in voluntary associations, earning success, God bless us, even working in government. In different ways that you can earn success. And they want ways that will maximize their own special interests, their own special talents. This administration's policies have not given them much help. We can see from the sluggish economic growth figures that instead of getting a job, finding work, creating a job or jobs that maximize your own special talents, that build on your own special interests, your own uniqueness as a human being in a free society, you take what you can get in this one. And you're grateful for that increase in the minimum wage unless McDonald's moves a kiosk in your place. And they aren't very grateful for this. They are, and so I think the millennials here are at odds with this policy, and I think this election, I think, was a repudiation of the Obama Democrats' public policies. I don't think can be taken as an endorsement of Republican or conservative public policies. I don't think those policies have been developed or presented. I think it gives Republicans not a mandate, but an opportunity to advance forward with public policies that work with the grain of the character of our society, that work in an information age, that work to open the way to opportunities to people to maximize their own special interests and special needs and special gifts that they have and to develop them. I think we've seen some Republicans do this in state governments in a variety of different ways, and those people were rewarded even where some of those policies were extremely controversial, attacked, as you might imagine, by all the press, et cetera, et cetera. I think that nationally we've got a situation that where the Republicans have an opportunity through policies that they back in Congress, and starting with the kind of no-brainers like let's build the Keystone Pipeline. Pipelines are the safest way to transport oil. We've seen the railroad wrecks and so forth. And moving on to other things. We've seen some Republicans in Congress advance interesting and important new ideas. We will see Republican presidential candidates, and I can name a baker's dozen of them at this point, and we will see whether they do it. My old observations as a one-time political consultant is that what you need to do as a presidential candidate, or as a candidate for governor, executive office, is you need to come up with 3 or 4 issues that are important to the public, where your views are basically in line with the public and go with the grain of change in society, and issue positions in which you really believe, and issues that can work, A, in the primaries, B, in the general election, C, and most important, in governing. It's actually hard to do, and it's a challenge to any presidential candidate. Looking back on President Obama, I don't think he really did that. I don't think there was much issue content to his campaign. It was more, look what a neat guy I am. And if you look at his record, he's a person that doesn't seem very interested in the details of public policy. I suspect this room is not full of fans of Bill Clinton, but I think most of us would agree that he was interested in public policy. He did know a lot about the details. He worked pretty hard at that. This president, not so interested, and we've seen kind of the results. We've got, and we've seen increasing evidence of the incompetence of big government. I won't go on much on the 2016 presidential election. We can talk more about that in questions, but let me just leave you with some thoughts that I've had about the capacity of big government and a historic comparison of today's information age with the past's industrial age. There were 42 months between Pearl Harbor and VE Day. I wrote a column about this recently. I thought I better explain what VE Day is. A lot of people may not know it. Hillsdale, I think they're going to learn. Other places, the idea of the United States being victorious is not something they really want to promote. You know, we're the bad guys in the world. We're 42 months between VE Day and Pearl Harbor. In that time, the United States puts 16 million men, some women, in military uniform, transported them around the world to the shores of North Africa, Italy, and Normandy, to Germany, to the Philippines, the South Pacific Islands, around the Pacific. We developed, with wisdom of President Roosevelt, was that unlike his predecessor, President Wilson, he didn't nationalize industries. He worked with the industries and gave the industrial leaders, the business leaders, the go-ahead to work. And we produced tens of thousands of airplanes, of ships, hundreds of thousands of guns, tens of thousands of tanks. We supplied the world with food, most of the free world with food during that period of time. That's what Americans were able to accomplish in 42 months. Government was a part of that. But government wasn't the only part of it. Well, there were 42 months between the passage of Obamacare in March 2010 and the rollout of healthcare.gov in October 2013. That's what government could accomplish in 42 months. There's something wrong with this picture, and I think Americans are coming to realize it. I think this was a good year for Republicans, this was a good year for conservatives, this was a good election year for constitutionalism. But these fights go on, and the outcomes are not certain. I think conservatives have now been given an opportunity by the American people, and we'll see how well they handle it. Thanks very much. Matt? I think it's an issue of very little importance. I mean, why are Democrats picking up on this issue? I'm a recovering pollster. And if you do polls, you say, okay, what about Thomas Piketty, the French economist that says we should tax people at 80%? Let's poll that one. How does that do with the American people? Well, it doesn't do very well. They had one of these rap artists or something was going over to Paris, and they said, well, do you approve of the French government's policy of higher taxes on rich people? And he said, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. He says, yeah, the tax there on income is now 75%. And he said, whoa, 75%? That's ridiculous. Minimum wage polls well. People don't care. They recognize, perhaps just viscerally, that it ain't very important. If you want to redistribute income, if you want to use government UKs to redistribute income, it's about the most ineffective way you can do it. So, it's interesting that when Democrats pass an increase of the minimum wage, they almost never index it to inflation. Why is that? Because then they wouldn't have an issue of raising it 2 years and 4 years from then, or at some election when they weren't doing well on other issues and they wanted to bring up that old war horse, the minimum wage. Federal minimum wage dates 1938. That's not exactly up to date and new. Okay.
Stu Reuter asking the question. There's a plan, and I would even call it a plot, to bypass the Electoral College in future by having the electors of each state committed to go along with the popular vote of the country as a whole. Some states have even passed laws accepting that. What do you know about the status of that and its future?
Well, it's an attempt mostly by Democrats to relitigate the 2000 election. I think like a lot of the sort of gimmicky changes, it may turn out to work against the side that wants it if it ever got put into effect. Some Republicans could say, well, we should elect the president by congressional districts. Mitt Romney carried 226 congressional districts. Barack Obama carried 209. For those of you who had new math, 226 is a larger number than 209. I don't think that's going to come to anything. There's an argument for popular vote election of the president, but remember that we have different vote systems run by the 50 states and bless them, the District of Columbia. And we had the Florida controversy, and you had lawyers pouring into each one of 67 county seats. Well, if we had a national close popular vote, there are 3,141 counties. I think that idea is probably going nowhere, and it's just one of those things when you try to relitigate an election that you were upset about the outcome of.
Thank you. In California, we're changing the rules, making it easier to vote. Same-day registration. You can now postmark your ballot on Election Day and then count it up to 3 days later. It's just getting easier and easier.
3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months.
It's coming. Don't give them any ideas. Stop it. Now, they just found 10,000 ballots in the Amibera-Osi race. So tell us your thoughts on where we're going with this, on ballot security, on IDs, the whole 9 yards.
Well, my friend John Fund, who's with National Review, has written about this a lot and has persuaded me that it's a somewhat bigger problem than I thought, vote fraud. King County, Washington, and Seattle in the governor's race in 2000 and I think it was 2004. They said, oh, there's a back cupboard. There's 10,000 ballots in there. And guess who they're all voting for? Is there some hanky-panky going on? Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Democrats labor under what I think is an illusion that you've got low voter turnout because there's huge barriers to voting. It's actually really easy to vote. You have to show a picture ID, Anybody got on a plane without showing a picture ID, by the way? Get into a federal building, can't get in without a picture ID. You know, the fact is, actually, is a percentage of eligibles in recent years, we've had pretty high turnout. One of the interesting things is the biggest zoom in turnout from one presidential election to the next in the last 20 years is in 2004 as compared to 2000. The Obama, when the first election, which Bush was elected with 105 million, it's 122 million in 2004. In the Obama years, turnout goes from 129 million in 2008 to 126 million in 2012. We've got the final figures from California on that now. And you know, the declining turnout has happened in the era of Obama for whatever conclusions we want to draw from that. Some of the data that's misleading is people say, well, the percentage of eligibles may have gone down, or the percentage of total population voting has gone up. Yeah, it has, because we've got a much higher percent. We've got, you know, 13% of the people living in the country are non-citizens, and now in 1970 that was about 3 or 4% when we had a low ebb of immigration in the country. So if you look at actual eligibles, it's been pretty high. So, you know, I think there's some problems to be solved there. I think the danger of people being excluded from the polls is vastly exaggerated, and we will fight these things out state by state. Colorado had that all mail-in ballot now. There have been some complaints from Republicans that people didn't check the signatures of the mailed-in ballots. There's anecdotal evidence of campaign workers for left-wing organizations scouring wastebaskets, picking up mailed-in ballots, and then filling them out gleefully for the Democrats. We'll see what Colorado, now it's got a Republican state Senate and so forth, what they're going to do about that.
During the last two elections, we have really seen a lack of kitchen table issues being discussed. They're not being discussed by the press, and they're not being focused on to really allow the people to express themselves.
What's your kitchen table issue?
Well, if you want to talk about the war on women, the war on women can be summed up by a number of kitchen table issues, which is, do you have a good job? Can you put your children into college? Does your husband have a good job, which would allow a woman who wants to stay home with their children, it would allow her to stay home. The kitchen table issues, the press just seem to lack an intellectual curiosity with the normal questioning and the normal exploration that goes along with elections. Do you see any change for
I think you got to blame those guys. They wrote a Bill of Rights that guarantees us a free press, but not a fair one. They didn't think of that, and it's probably a good thing they didn't. Now, I think that actually, you know, the sluggish economy was the undercurrent in this campaign that was one of great force. It was a real undertow to the Democratic Party. And, you know, you can say, well, they didn't present enough statistics, or they didn't do this or that. This is something that people feel. They feel it from their families. They feel it from people around them, their communities. This has been a very disappointing and slow economic recovery. You will get some Democratic economists that will say, well, the years from 2001 to 2007 were not as great as some other economic growth years. I think there's something, I think that is an intellectually serious argument. Business formation is down a lot. That is particularly accentuated during this administration, but it's a longer-term trend as well. And it's one that I think we all need to think about. And I think one of the things that you see some of these Republicans doing, the Marco Rubios and Mike Lees, the Rick Snyders and Scott Walkers in their states, is saying, okay, let's look for some public policies that can push, that can nudge people, that can give people openings to move in a better direction. I don't think anybody's just sitting out there and saying, we have the ultimate answer. I think that those who look back nostalgically to the Reagan campaign say, well, if we just lower taxes on high earners, that's going to solve a lot of problems. It may solve a lot of problems, but it also, you know, the tax levels are not as high as when Reagan took office, so you're not going to get that kind of, you would probably be wise not to expect the kind of bounce we had. I mean, we're told we should be happy we're getting 200,000 new jobs a month at this point, and 3% economic growth rate. Well, there was one month in 1983 when you got 1 million new jobs. Oh, by the way, the country had 40 million fewer people then, too. And you had 7% growth rates. How we can produce that, I think it's something that all of us need to think more about, and that our public officials, political candidates, and even our political consultants ought to think about.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all. I will draw your attention very briefly to our upcoming lecture on the evening of Tuesday, November 18th. Stephen Cambone, who is the Department of Defense policy official in the Bush administration, is speaking on anticipating history, how well China can control its destiny, and it is the Harold Arude Memorial Lecture. Please join us for that. Thank you all for coming.
Three, and we're just as happy